Good evening and welcome to this meeting of West Berkshire Council's Eastern Area Planning Committee. I'm Councillor Alan McCrow and I'm Chairman of the committee. The other members of the committee present are Councillors Paul Kander, Jeff Mays, Justin Pemberton, Vicky Poole, Richard Somner and Clive Taylor. The following officers are in attendance to advise and support the meeting. Simon Till, Planning Team Manager, Paul Goddard, Principal Development Control Engineer, Highways, Michael Butler, Principal Planning Officer, Sarah House, Legal Executive, Sam Chiverton, who's our Zoom host, and Ben Ryan, who's our clerk this evening. Before we start proceedings, I'd like to explain that tonight's meeting is being held both over Zoom and with councillors present in the council chamber. The meeting is being live streamed on YouTube so members of the public can follow proceedings. Please could I ask everyone present in the chamber to make sure you switch on your microphones when invited to speak directly into them and to switch them off when finished. Could I also make sure you've put your mobile phones to silent and have turned off the sound on your laptops. If we hear the evacuation alarm this evening, you must leave the building immediately. Please proceed via the safe emergency route and please follow any instructions given by officers. The assembly point is the car park of the Dolphin Pub. If the lockdown alarm sounds, we will remain seated and await instructions from officers. We will adjourn the meeting until such time as it's safe to proceed. When voting, only members in the chamber can vote and voting will be by show of hands. Do members have any questions about how we're proceeding this evening? Thank you. First item on the agenda is apologies. Do we have any apologies, please?
Yes, Chairman. We've received apologies from Councillor Ross McKinnon with Councillor Joe Stewart stepping in as substitute, and we've also received apologies from Councillor Jeremy Cotton.
Thank you. We'll move on then to the item 2, the minutes of the last meeting. Are there any issues in the minutes, please, to raise before I ask for a motion to approve them? Councillor Somner.
Happy to propose, Chair.
Are you proposing to be adopted? Thank you. Find a seconder, please. Councillor Poole, thank you very much. All those in favour of approving the minutes, please show. Anybody against? Thank you. And you abstain. Thank you. So I'll sign the minutes and return them to the clerk. I move on then to item 3. Do any members wish to make a declaration of interest? Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chairman. I believe that one of the applicants' dog walking facilities is in the ward for myself and Councillor Taylor, and in the past I have had occasion to talk to one of the applicants about that particular location, but I don't believe that should stop me from taking part fully in the debate tonight.
Okay, thank you. Any other declarations? Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, really following on from what Councillor Stewart has just said, yes, there is a facility in my ward which I have actually visited. I'm not a dog user, but I've visited with another dog user, so I'm familiar with the facility there. I did also receive one call from somebody who I believe was supporting the application, but that won't in any way influence the way that I judge this application.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yep, move on to item 4, and the first planning application to be determined this evening is number 24/01998 FUL-MAJ, land south of School Hill, Midgham. Could I ask Michael Butler, please, to introduce the application.
Thank you, Chairman. The application is to consider this evening.
Microphone, Michael.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me all right? The application is being considered at committee because it was called in by the ward members if officers recommended refusal. However, consequently or subsequently, given the fact we received in excess of 10 letters of objection, even if officers had recommended approval, it would have had to been heard at committee in any event. The reason the ward member wished it for members to consider this at committee was to view the site, which obviously you've done on the committee site visit. Apologise I wasn't there, and the local need for the facility. This is the application site, which I'm sure you're probably familiar with now in the red line. It's land to the south of School Hill in Midgham Parish, off New Road Hill. Can everyone hear me all right? This is the proposed tree planting plan, landscaping plan for the scheme. And I'll do a fuller presentation in a minute. I'll just skip through the slides. And this is the smaller block plan showing the proposed access of the adjacent highway with the parking spaces proposed. For those of you who didn't see the get to the site visit, this is looking south towards the site, proposed site access. This is looking north. And these are views across the site. So it's a fairly extensive field. And this is a photo of the proposed access point. Well, it's an existing agricultural access site point. Again, further views. This is along the western boundary with the Webcroft Copse, which is ancient woodland. And this is looking south across the site. So I'll just leave it with the block plan. The application seeks planning permission for the change of use of an agricultural parcel of land to a new dog walking facility, which is deemed to be a sui generis use, that is a planning use class of its own. I've mentioned the parking and access. If approved, it will also involve the erection of a 1.8 metre high security fence to retain the dogs. Although I should say, under permitted development rights on open land, fencing up to 2 metres high can be erected without planning permission in any event. Just for clarity, the site does not lie in the North Wessex Downs NDL, which was formerly the AONB, which lies to the north of the site. In terms of legal and procedural matters, there are no financial considerations for the council to take into account. If the application is approved, it will not be still liable. In terms of human rights, those matters are set out in paragraph 3.8 and 3.9. Turning over the page to page 18 of the agenda, in terms of consultations, Midgham Parish Council originally supported the application, noting that it would be beneficial to the local community and noting that the applicant is well respected locally. Although there is an officer note there that if planning permission is granted by the council, assuming, of course, you don't put a personal condition on it, it would not be personal to the applicant. Quickly turning to the update sheet, Chairman. Subsequently, Midgham Parish Council have now altered their original view of support to one of objection. This alteration was apparently due to some internal confusion over minutes recorded. Probably the most important consultee in reflection of this application is WBC Highways, who are recommending refusal to the application on sustainability grounds. And you'll see in the recommendation to refuse at the end, that accords with the overall officer recommendation on this application. Environmental Health raised no objections on noise grounds. I believe the ecological objections and concerns may have been overcome today, and they are capable of being mitigated through a conditional permission if one is granted, of course, but we are not recommending that. The tree officer is recommending conditional permission. Nature space has no concerns about newts, and the drainage officer is now satisfied with the application, and the council archaeologist has no objections to the scheme. In terms of public representations, at the time of writing the report, we had 17 people supporting the application and 15 objecting. I'll just draw your attention to the update sheet, where we have a number of other concerns. One letter from concerned local residents noting worries about the change in the parish view. They note the apparent bias in support of the application from the local ward member and the nature of the applicant who has had some enforcement action against him. The officer merely repeats this as reporting, but these are purely procedural matters and should hold no weight in determining the application in terms of material planning considerations. However, we have received one additional letter of objection from the adjoining landowner who owns the copse to the west of the site, which is an environmental stewardship scheme. He is concerned that if this does change to a dog walking facility, that will affect the ecological, I'll say viability, shall I put it that way, of the copse. Although, well, that's a matter for members to consider. One further objection from an existing objector, so it's not an additional objector, but it's an additional objector. I think it was a she or he. Concerns remain about the future operating hours of the business should permission be granted, which could be very long over the summer months. So the reasons for the objection and support are set out in the agenda, and I'm sure you've read the report, so I won't repeat them there. In terms of the appraisal of the application, I'll just give a brief summary because I'm sure you've read the report. Principle of the development need for the facility, highway sustainability issues, ecology, and other matters. In terms of the principle under policy ADPP1, the reasons are set out in paragraph 6.2, offers accept that the application is partially satisfactory in policy terms, setting aside, of course, the overall sustainability objections that we have to the application location. And that flows on to the next few paragraphs, highways and sustainability issues. I won't go through this in any detail. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I do draw your attention particularly to Appendix 1, which is a recent appeal decision for Travellers Rest Farm, Hungerford Lane, Bradfield Southend, recently dismissed an appeal on a very similar application, and the inspector there considered the application should be refused on sustainability grounds. And that coincides with the officer view and the highways officer view. In terms of ecology, the council ecologist has raised a number of concerns. I believe these may have been ameliorated, but at the moment, officers do have concerns about that, but it can be conditioned, we believe, should the committee determine to approve the application. Other issues, there have been ones of increased noise due to dogs barking. However, the environmental health officers raised no objections. I made the point about the personal permission, which is not relevant. So if permission is granted tonight, it will not be personal and can be, the permission can be for any operator, not hounds and bounds, or bounds and hounds. However, before I come to the main recommendation, Chairman, I'll just draw your attention to points 3 to 6 on the update sheet. Since writing the report, additional supporting information has been received from the applicant, and that has been uploaded onto the public file for at least 4 working days. It notes in summary that the applicant runs a well-respected and managed local business, operating the local area for 8 years and meets a defined community need in the dog walking community. Their view is that the site is in fact in a sustainable location. The application should be approved. And it also notes, quite rightly, I may say, a number of other dog walking facilities in the district have already been approved under delegated authority by council officers, and it will also assist the local rural economy. I believe there was a question at the committee site visit about the closest property to the north, Midgham Cottages. That is 69 metres from the application red line boundary. SUD's response, now that additional information has been submitted, they are recommending conditional permission. I mentioned the ecology. However, Chairman, on balance, as in 7.1, we are still as officers recommending that you refuse planning permission for this application on the sustainability grounds set out on page 22. And the second reason for refusal, at the moment, adopting the precautionary approach, relates to insufficient information in relation to ecology. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any comments by Highways, please, Mr. Goddard?
Yes, Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity. I consider that there are 3 main issues that your officers have considered with this planning application. The first issue is the access arrangements. There is an existing gated access onto the public highway, and there have been concerns regarding sight lines, not only expressed by your officers, but also some from the local community. The applicant's highway consultants commissioned a set of surveys that measured vehicle speeds along the road outside the proposed entrance. And from that, we've calculated the required sight lines in line with the speeds recorded. And in both directions from the access, a distance of 57 metres should be seen. There has recently been some cutting back of hedges either side of the site. I suspect more may need to be cut back to achieve that sight line. It's my own view is, and from our records, is that the sight lines can be achieved within land that is public highway. It's not for me to comment on the impact of the hedge from a landscaping or ecology point of view. Mr. Butler would have touched upon that with views from our ecology colleagues. My role is to ensure that those sight lines can be achieved within land controlled by the applicant and within land that is public highway. And my advice to you is that they can be achieved. The second issue is regards to traffic numbers. Again, I've noted concerns from the local community regarding this. We've been informed by the applicants that there should be some 16 users a day maximum. So we would expect some 16 vehicles in and 16 out per day. My advice to you in that regard is that those numbers are not sufficient to warrant refusal on a traffic impact grounds. They are, in my view, relatively low. Your highway officers are, however, objecting with regards to sustainability. The proposed location is very rural. It's not, in our view, close to many other facilities or areas of population. There are no other means to travel there except by car. Now, I'm not expecting dogs to be brought by bicycle there or on public transport in any case. And that is part of the issue. These uses are all car related. And while some of the local population will inevitably use the facility, we cannot control who the clientele will be. It is highly likely, in our view, that many of the clientele will come from locations such as Reading, Thatcham and Newbury to come here and exercise their dogs. So in doing that, this proposal, in my view, encourages additional travel from urban centres to rural locations, which is contrary to local government policies in reducing carbon emissions and is contrary to the council's climate change emergency. It would seem that your highway officers are not alone in taking that view. We have refused similar proposals before across the district when they are proposed in locations such as this. Again, I'd refer you to the appeal decision that's in your packs, and I'd particularly highlight paragraph 11 of the planning inspector's report. They say the site is not in a suitable location for the proposed development, having regard to its accessibility for sustainable forms of transport. Thus, the proposal would conflict with policy CS10, CS13, and the Area Delivery Plan Policy 1 of the core strategy, which, amongst other things, collectively seek to reduce the need to travel and to minimise the impact of all forms of travel on the environment and help tackle climate change. The proposal would also conflict with the objectives of the framework, the National Planning Policy Framework, which seeks to promote sustainable transport. And on that basis, Chairman, while the access and the traffic levels are found to be acceptable with your highway officers object on terms of sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you. Move on then to members of the public who wish to speak. First of all, we have some objectors, Damien McKinney, Ian O'Rourke, Chrissy McKinney, Benjamin McKinney. Would you like to come up to the rostrum, please?
Chairman, councillors, it's me representing.
Okay, I would just go on to say, if you want, one person can speak and the rest of you there to answer questions, because I was going to ask you to remain at the rostrum when you finish speaking for any questions from members that they can gather around you.
Very good.
If you wish.
No, that's fine.
In that case, you have 5 minutes. Would you like a warning when you get, say?
Well, hopefully I won't go that long.
I've had that one before.
Please do, Chairman.
Okay. The timing will start when you start speaking.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, councillors, ladies and gentlemen. I've been asked to attend tonight and represent a number of families in the Midgham, particularly the Hill and the Woolhampton area. I have dogs. I love dogs, so I can understand why people would want to walk their dogs. But a number of these families have asked me to represent them on the basis of they don't like to make a fuss, but they're really concerned about this particular project. At the heart of this, it seems from the local community that it is an opportunistic approach by a company who have been offered a particular field and therefore not necessarily applying the appropriate criteria, many of which we've heard about this evening, have jumped into saying, let's use this field. Now, that's not for me necessarily to judge, and I've heard it at length, but I'd like to cover 3 areas, if I may, which are of greatest concern to those living in the community. Number 1, I put under the mental trauma. You referred earlier on to a number of the families. There are some on the northern boundary, and there are some others. 2 of the families in those cottages have young children. One of those families, the children in particular, have suffered an incident in the past related to dogs. Now, given the distance, you'd think, well, maybe it's not quite so bad, maybe it can be dealt with, but of those summer evenings with a prevailing wind that goes towards them, that family in particular said, we are really, really concerned for our children. And a number of others in the area have also said, from a noise point of view, it clearly is irritating and agitated and so forth. So they're concerned about that. But that's pretty significant. But the second concern is raised by one particular household. And we talked about cars going up and down that road. There are a number of cars. The issue with the sight lines and with that gate, and I've been up there several times, is that that is a straight. You saw in the picture earlier on, it is a straight road. The average speed is 34.6 miles an hour, is what I understood was reported in the thing. Anything over 20 miles an hour will significantly injure you. If it's an average of 34.6, then there are some probably driving at 50 miles an hour or well north of 40 miles an hour. But there is one particular household with one lady who in November 2023 was out with her dog walking in that area and she was hit by a car. Here we are we're going into the second year. She still embraces multiple operations and she will not go out on that road again. And she is terrified of this area and the dogs and the sight lines and so forth. She's very, very, very afraid of it. And then the third, frankly, I represent actually the farmer who's referred to earlier on, who's actually got one of the fields next door. It's not just the ecology of the woods, but indeed has actually allowed it to rewild and has nightingales flourishing there. So absolutely on sustainability and ecological, but I just want to please tonight bring to your attention, there is real concern amongst the local community for this project. Thank you for allowing me the chance to speak, Chairman, councillors.
Thank you. Would you just like to remain there for a few minutes in case there's any members wish to ask questions? Are there any questions, please? Apparently not, so thank you very much. Oh, sorry, Councillor Stewart.
Some quite horrible situations that you've described there. I'm interested to know in particular with regards people walking their dogs currently. So you mentioned a resident who was hit while walking her dog on that road. Where would dog walkers normally go in that area?
It's a great question. We've actually got some fantastic walks already up there through the woods. So all the dog owners tend to take them on leads and they use all the pathways. I mean, we've got so many bridleways around that and beautiful walks, which is partly why we're all wondering, why do we need a park or a field when we already have such wonderful areas to walk?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Kander.
As a follow-up to that question, but where do people let their dogs off on the leads? Because that's typically what these fields are for.
In their gardens.
Okay.
Partly because, to be honest, I mean, I'm a lover of letting my dog off the lead because I think it's nice to see them run. But we do have a lot of wild animals. We have deer, we have muntjacs, we have pheasants, we have a lot of birds. So you tend to keep them on a lead.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
Would the applicant, Deborah White and Francis Long, please come to the rostrum? Right. Okay. You also have 5 minutes. Would you like a warning?
No, won't be necessary. Thank you, Chairman. I'll do 2 minutes or try and keep it to 2 minutes and then Debbie hopefully will follow up with 3 minutes if that's okay.
Okay, and could you both remain at the rostrum in case there's any questions from members when you finish, please? Okay.
Chairman, councillors, thank you very much indeed. My family has lived at Hawkhawk Farm since 1966. Like many small farms in the UK, we've struggled to generate an income and have therefore sought to diversify. West Berkshire's core strategy regarding the rural economy is clear, and I quote, "Proposals for appropriate farm diversification will be supported where it can be demonstrated that the proposal will make a long-term contribution to sustaining the agricultural enterprise as a whole. By opening up a secure dog walking field, it will, 1, help Hawkhawk Farm to generate a viable income, sustaining it as an agricultural enterprise. 2, it will ensure that the field pays its own way and is not reliant on government subsidies. In other words, not reliant on taxpayers' money. 3, the field will remain green, surrounded by trees, preserving the integrity of the surrounding countryside. And 4, the field will work in conjunction with busy public footpaths in the immediate area. It will provide locals with a safe space to exercise their dogs, avoiding the unfortunate occurrence of dogs worrying livestock. Only last week, sheep were killed by an unruly dog in a neighbour's field. Hounds and Bounds have demonstrated a real need to expand their service and provide secure dog walking premises in the local area. Their impeccable reputation and growing client numbers speak for themselves when it comes to assessing the sustainability of this business. By backing Hounds and Bounds, you are backing the ability of farms to support themselves while boosting the rural economy. What better way to preserve and help those living and working in the countryside? Thank you. I'll pass over to Debbie.
My name is Deborah, and our business Hounds and Bounds rents out securely fenced dog walking fields to a huge variety of customers. We have lots of visitors and pets with anxiety or disabilities, meaning they're not able to walk for long distances on the local footpaths. By hiring the fields for an hour, their pet is able to get the exercise they require. Sessions at this field will cost £14, and by making a financial commitment, we find our customers are responsible and respectful. We are in our 8th year of operation and have built a strong, resilient business that's in high demand. We have over 5,000 customers registered with us, and we are currently only able to offer 32 sessions a day. We are a fully rural business, and our locations need to be in calm, low-traffic areas. The field only has one booking at a time, managed through the website. This means there is low vehicle movement, which is further supported by a proposed on-site waiting area in addition to the car park. The location of this field is very strategic for us. Around 500 of our current customers are from a 3-mile radius of New Road Hill. They are already travelling to visit our other enclosures. The site is located very close to the A4, but being a 3-minute drive from this busy road enables us to meet our countryside location requirements while ensuring minimal travel. We take our ecological responsibilities and impact very seriously. We overseed and encourage grass growth and are proposing to plant 70 metres of new hedgerow and 20 trees. This is in conjunction with the field remaining a field, so we're able to deliver ecological improvements. We want to highlight the 15-metre agreed buffer between the field and the adjacent woods. Coupled with the secure fencing, this means there will be no impact on our neighbours. The main challenge we face not only here, but on our all application sites is not meeting the highway's unsustainable criteria. The site that has been highlighted at Hungerford Lane, Bradfield, that was refused to appeal, is a small field that was to be part of a boarding business. The nearest main road to this site would be the A4 at a 15-minute drive, and this is only reached through small country roads. Thank you. They did not provide any information on the number of dogs visiting and did not quantify the number of car movements. It was also stated in the appeal documents that the application would be using the site for exercising of dogs associated with the dog boarding business, meaning much higher usage. This is a very different proposal to our business. We do, however, want to highlight there have been 3 West Berkshire relevant dog field planning applications that highways have refused due to unsustainability, and they have then been approved by the council on balance. These 3 applications are much more similar in size and access to our proposal, and these are Fido's Field Bradfield, Good Boys Lane Mortimer, and land east of Solhampstead Hill. For minimal business impact, we are able to contribute to the local economy through business rates and employing local people to help us clean and maintain the sites. We facilitate good relations between walkers and build our own customer community.
Draw your remarks to a close, please.
We are able to support the West Berkshire Economic Development Strategy to support rural business and to build a strong, diverse rural economy. We welcome your questions.
Thank you. Yes, could you both remind of any questions? Any questions from members, please? Councillor Wise.
Sorry, Jeff, if you could just turn on the microphone. Oh, my apologies.
Sorry, you mentioned the site at Boys Lane, Mortimer.
Yes, yeah.
That is in my patch.
Yeah.
I don't recall where that site is.
It's Woof World. It is Good Boys Lane. They did a application for, it was days, and a dog field was included in that. I think it was 2021 off the top of my head.
It exists now, as far as I'm
Oh,
aware.
no, it does, yes. Woof World, Mortimer.
Never seen it. No, I know that area very well. Sorry, you mentioned, sorry, your colleague mentioned that it's a green area, a green farm area. I couldn't go to the site.
Sorry, can you hear me now? I couldn't go to the site visit, but it's a farmed area and it's green cover or grass or?
It's presently grass, yes.
So you use it for grazing?
Yeah,
Cows or sheep or?
Cows and sheep, yes.
Yeah, okay. And you've now suggested that you're going to put a high wired fence around the whole site. Is that presumably to keep the dogs in and prevent them from escaping during that free run period? Is that the idea?
Correct. It's a secure exercise area for the dogs.
okay.
There is an existing fence there at the moment. But
Well,
it's
I've
just
seen
not
that from the drawings,
it's
yeah.
not quite high enough.
Okay. You will bring the dogs to the site in a van, presumably?
In personal car, usually.
One at a time? One dog at a time?
One booker, one person can bring up to 6 dogs with them.
Yeah, I've seen situations in Hampshire which are similar. Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Kanda.
You mentioned you had a list of 500 people who, have they registered an interest in having something in that area? As in, are they currently using other facilities of yours and they would?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, they are registered customers with us and have financially purchased sessions at our other sites.
At other sites, presumably travelling further distance, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, just from Wolverhampton, it's an 8-mile journey to Bradfield, where this would be a 0.7 mile just up the road.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, could you, you mentioned a waiting area and a car park in relation, I was at the site visit, but could you just explain, how many cars in total could park there? Is the waiting area separate from the car parking area? Just, could you clarify that?
Yeah, the car park and the waiting area is separate. Within the car park, there's space for 3 cars to park, and within the waiting area, there's also space for 3 cars. Yeah, at a maximum, yeah.
Any other members? I'd like to ask a question. Actually, you mentioned, and it's also in our report, but a security fence. On the site visit, I think you said it was a stock fence. We're not going to have a palisade fence or anything like that, are we?
No, it's what you would find on the edge of a deer park in a rural location. It's exactly that fencing. It's deer stock net fencing.
Thank you. Thank you. No other questions, so thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I call on the local ward member, Councillor Reid, please? Councillor Reid, you also have 5 minutes. Would you like a warning?
Always. Thank you, Chair.
1 minute before the... Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee and officers in attendance. You've heard from the objectors and the applicant, so these are just my thoughts, which I think might help debate regarding the application change of use of land to dog walking facilities. I am concerned to see that Highways have made a recommendation of rejection, and I'm sure this will be the main topic of debate on this application by committee members. New Road, Hill Road, where the entrance is proposed, utilising and improving the existing field access, is comparably a sound road compared to numerous other local rural areas in my ward. There are no restrictions that I'm aware of on that road, and it seems quite satisfactory to take rush hour traffic in the morning and evenings to Carbonswood Lane, Upper Bucklebury, and to go to Thiel, Thatcham and Reading and beyond. In addition, there's no constraint in passing of modern 32-tonne timber transporters that regularly use the road from Carpenterswood and Middlewood and Bucklewood Common, with the current regeneration work, which is actually the largest currently in the south of England. Further, there is no issues of the frequent up to 31 tonnes of agricultural vehicles passing down the road. The majority of people will come up the A4 as well, which, as you know, is a particularly good order as rural roads go into West Berkshire, and Woolhampton being a service village itself, which is only about 1,000 metres away from the site entrance from the A4 junction. I do see that the traffic report concedes that people will not be taking anxious dogs on public transport. Access to itself is also superbly provided by numerous public footpaths to the site from the local villages like Chapel Road, Beanham, Midgham itself, Upper Woolhampton and Upper Bucklebury. And I do wonder if public rights of way map can be put on the screen for committee members to review when they're debating this as well. I myself has an anxious dog, and taking it to the Darling Dogs of May site at Headley as a young dog, which is a significant drive as I live near Upper Bucklebury, has now enabled me to walk the dog in public areas without fear of a bad reaction from her with other dogs or people on footpaths in the area as it has got older. The business applicant, I think, has proven the need in surveys for the area. I am not sure why cycling was brought up in the consultation report. I've personally never seen a dog cycle, but I think that has also been conceded in the report. There are also no danger signs for cyclists on this stretch of road. In comparison to other rural businesses, large commercial stables, for example, the traffic impact will be small. And I do think the statement that there would be impact, but I believe that is now being conceded. Apologies, I should have scratched that one out when I was listening to the original commentary. I see that the applicant has got the significant local and district-wide support for these types of facilities. It's much better to have a dog training in a controlled environment than to lose control of a dog on a public footpath of nowhere it could run and cause issues. Who knows, even causing a traffic accident. So in summary, I think if this is rejected, I think the committee members should also consider if the council is missing its aims to encourage and increase rural business and diversification, and to encourage use of the countryside as an amenity for the public. I believe this aim was supported by the previous administration and has cross-party support within the council at present. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to remain there for a few minutes for any questions? Any questions from members, please? No. Aside from me, there was a gentleman who cycles around Thiel with a dog in a trailer. So, so it has been done, but very, very rarely, I must admit. Thank you very much. Move on then to questions for officers. Do any members have any questions for officers, please? And
for Mr. Goddard, I think. So I'm just wondering, with regards to the BNG and the fact that it's been refused on that basis, I guess what I'm wondering about is if this was a housing development, or if indeed if it was a livery, which we had last meeting or the meeting before, there would be traffic, and that didn't seem to be an issue for those things. So I'm just trying to understand what the difference is with regards to something like this, because if it was a livery place, yes, that's more rural as a business type, but it still generates the same issue.
Yeah, good question. We take the view, when we deal with a lot of horse racing planning applications in this district, and we take the view that the horse racing industry is rural in nature. It cannot go in a town or a city on the outskirts of a town or a city. While facilities such as this, you are attracting, in my view, traffic from towns to come out and use this facility in a rural area, when these facilities may be better situated on the outskirts of towns. Now, there was one example made earlier on by the councillors in front of me here. There is a Hounds and Bounds facility at Pinson's Lane in Tilehurst, which we did not object to from Highways because we took the view that the facility was close to a significant area of population where people could walk there, and any journeys made by car would be much shorter to a location such as that, than the location that is before you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Any other questions? Councillor Mays?
I said I've got a couple more.
Oh, sorry.
That's fine. So with regards to the local demographics, hence the question I raised to the applicant, because I'm mindful that there are some, they're not large conurbations, but there are conurbations close by where the alternatives could be, and I think we heard ourselves that there's maybe 500, and I used to live at Upper Wolverhampton, and I know people who live in Tilehurst and they struggle to either get into some of the other fields that are available, or they're too small, particularly if you've got large dogs. So I'm wondering whether or not there is or should be a need, or was already a need, of looking at the demographics of travel from other sites and other locations in order to cater for the business that they may be able to do.
Yeah, thank you. The demographics is that the area is quite low populated in the vicinity of the site. And we've taken the view that there are significant numbers of public rights of way and open spaces that the local community in rural locations can use. We continue to take the view that this facility would be used primarily by people who live in large accommodations and would travel a greater distance to come to this location to exercise their dogs.
In terms of the applications and the B&G, what's the assumptions these days with regards to EVs use as opposed to ICE? Because clearly as years go on, the impact is likely to be less, the way the government forces us to do things. So,
yeah, that's a good question as well. Electric vehicles are becoming more predominant. There's no guidance nationally on how to consider the ongoing march of electric vehicles, but you could also take the view that they themselves would need to be charged, which then takes power off the grid and could then increase carbon emissions in being charged. And if you use your car, electric vehicle, more, then you are needing it to be charged more.
I think that's a slightly thin argument, that last one, but I'll take it.
That's your point of view.
Yeah.
Use your extra car more, you've got to charge it more.
Oh. V8 4.4, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Goddard, for you again, please. Can you please confirm the speed limit on this road? We've talked about speeds of 30, mid-30s and 40s, but what is the speed limit on that road? Is it the national speed limit?
Just a moment, I need to log back into my machine. We'll look it up and we can be very sure. Yeah, I think it's the national speed limit. It is the national speed limit within the vicinity of this site, which is why we would have asked the applicants to commission speed surveys, which they did so.
So the national speed limit at this site is what, 60 miles an hour?
It is.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, a couple of questions. First one for Mr. Goddard. Going back to the issues around cars, people travelling from urban areas to get to this particular site. Going back to the Pinson's Hill site, it strikes me that if someone living in Reading, which is a very large urban area, wish to use a facility like this, they would presumably choose to use the one in Pinson's Hill rather than travelling many miles further to get to the to this particular facility. So I would suggest that, given that I can't remember where the other sites of this business are actually located, but certainly in the case of the Pinson's one, it would seem that may satisfy at least some of the demand in Reading, and I would suggest that would actually reduce the fact that there is that other site of Pinson's, would reduce the traffic travelling from urban areas to this proposed location.
Chairman, yes, one would hope for that if you lived in Tarles, Calcott, Reading, that you would use the facilities that are closest to you. But we cannot control who the clientele are who will visit this site. It's not possible to choose the people who will go there to. And the best thing to do is to not have facilities that would encourage people to travel longer distances, as we've mentioned, and instead preferably use the ones that are already nearby that are acceptable to us in highways, including the one at Pinson's Lane.
Any other? Councillor Kander again.
Again, I guess it's for yourself again, Mr. Goddard. Do we know of any sites that are near Thatcham that are being used for this? I would have asked the applicants, but because that's about 1 kilometre away. And if you're in Thatcham, you've either got to go west towards
I think we're
Newbury.
getting away really from the kind of questions on this particular
Okay, so
application.
the question is still regarding the amount of traffic, because I'm not convinced that there would be a significant increase in traffic with regards to the BNG application of the refusal for this planning permission. So what I'm really looking at is actually the net might be a gain rather than a loss if it's looked at holistically.
What I'm doing is looking at dog places near Newbury, Berkshire, and I'm on Google, and there are some facilities in near Thatcham, for instance, the Woodland Waggy Walks. But other than that, I without perhaps doing a thorough search on Google, I can't really help you further.
And one last question. I don't know if this applies, but is there any particular offset that could be applied in order to make it so that it was acceptable? I don't know if that's applicable in this case, like it is with housing.
So it's a good question. Unfortunately not, otherwise we wouldn't be recommending refusal. Thank you.
So I wasn't getting you in particular, Councillor Kander. The whole series of questions were going in that direction. And yeah. Anyway, Councillor Poole.
Thank you, Chair. So, Mr. Goddard, I think this one might be for you, but it could also be equally Mr. Butler. So you guys can take it in turns. So the applicant very correctly noted that their sphere of diversification of a farm involves moving part of their field into something else in order to generate an income, which is part of our rural rejuvenation strategy for supporting businesses. Listening to your comments today, it seems interesting that we are supporting the development of businesses, but in your comments, you're saying that people will then have to travel to that business, which then carries a negative impact. And I just wonder if you could speak to that a little more, because I'm somewhat confused as whether we are supporting local business but not allowing them to have a premises by where they can go and consume services, or people can go and consume services.
I can answer that if you wish, Chairman. Would you answer that?
Councillor, sorry, Mr. Butler, can you?
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a good question, and I've addressed that to an extent in my report under policy ADPP1 and made reference to CS10. And it does concede in the report, and that's why at the end of the day it is a balanced recommendation, As the supporters have said, and the applicant, it will in fact assist rural diversification. But my view as case officer in advising the committee is that at the end of the day, it's your development plan, should be read as a whole. And it's very important that the wider sustainability issues in officer view should also be taken into account. Now, that's a matter of judgment and balance. The judgment and balance that officers have come is that the sustainability issues in this case and the other concerns should outweigh the diversification benefits. At the end of the day, what I would say as the case officer advising you, the diversification benefits are for effectively a private benefit. I'm not belittling that private benefit, but it is a private gain, commercial gain. Whereas the sustainability issues are wider public issues, which obviously you'll be familiar with. And that's why in this case, we consider that the sustainability issues should be the factor that weighs most heavily. Thanks.
Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, just I think it's a question of clarification, I think, for Mr. Butler. On when you made your opening remarks, I thought I heard you say that the ecological issues had been to some extent or largely overcome, yet towards the end of your statement, you then referred to the point 2 of the reasons for refusal, that the applicant had failed to provide sufficient information on ecological grounds. Can you just clarify what the situation there? Because has the information been provided or not?
It may have been late today. I was actually on leave this afternoon, and that's why I'm not sure. But in any event, the ecologist still has to comment on that information. And so if the application is refused, I would strongly recommend you still attach the ecology reason for refusal, because if the application is appealed, the councillor's planning authority needs a hook to frame the ecological concerns. It may well be that that reason for refusal will then fall away during the appeal process, and that's quite common. I'm not saying it will, but it may. Certainly the sustainability issue wouldn't fall away, and we defend that.
Okay. Any other questions? Councillor Somner.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Goddard, back to you, I'm afraid. Item 6.4 in the report states, as far as I'm reading it, that there are maximum 3 parking spaces. And yet I'm sure I heard in presentations earlier that there would be 6. Can you just clarify your understanding of that, please?
Yes, Chairman, I can. We are expecting 16 dog walkers maximum per day. Only 1, as the applicant has mentioned, will be present at a time. So therefore, we're happy with 3 in case somebody's leaving and somebody's arrived, and somebody might then arrive at the end of the session before. So we're happy with 3 car parking spaces that would serve a facility where an appointment is made for 1 person coming to walk their dog at a time.
So just to be clear, you would be happy if there was a minimum of 3, but if there was to be 6 provided, and I'm going to go between the 2 of you now, Mr. Butler, does that become an application issue if we're talking about different numbers?
Yeah. Well, there's 2 difficulties with that. If there were 6, then I may, as case officer, begin to have concerns about potential visual impact. It'd be minor, but at the current level, I don't, but that becomes more problematic. And secondly, it would certainly be an application amendment issue, and you wouldn't be able to do that at this committee. We'd have to go back, and I'm not recommending that at all unless you direct us to do that. My Simon Till, I'm sure, could advise further on that, but that would certainly be a material amendment to the application.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted clarity that both officers, it would appear, have an expectation of 3 parking spaces.
Chairman, if I may, when we attended the site visit, and I think that this puts the issue to bed, hopefully, It was pointed out the location of the 3 car parking spaces proposed. It was also pointed out the location of a waiting area, which was of similar size. So I anticipate that the presentation conflated the waiting area and the parking spaces there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions, please? In that case, can we move on to debate? Would someone like to open the debate, please?
Well, it might as well be me then, by the look of it. This is not as straightforward as some might think it should be, in my opinion. I've tried to do the maths to work out what the economics would be behind this, and actually I've trying to listen to the conversation at the same time I've given up, and I note in the report that we haven't had anything come through that gives us that sort of information where we would normally expect for an application to have some sort of financial background on it where business was concerned, I believe. I am concerned about the sustainability. I am concerned about putting more traffic into areas where a lot of colleagues, a lot of members around the council chamber are trying to push back on traffic movements, especially in the countryside. So we need to be careful, not really so much as precedents being set, because I think they're already out there. We know that there are existing areas. I don't believe the one local to me went through particularly straightforwardly, if memory serves. But I think we need to be cautious of conflating things that we're trying to support, as in rural economy, and something where we can't actually see financially what that support would mean, just to keep a farm going by means of 16 visits a day. Seems a little low on the numbers side as far as I'm concerned at the moment. Obviously, Chair, more than happy to hear what colleagues around the room have got to bring to the table.
Thank you. Anybody else like to?
So I'm also conflicted, and I think, as Councillor Sumner said, this is not a simple decision. On the face of it, it might have appeared to be, because on the one hand, we do want to support local businesses, and at, I guess, £90 a day as a minimum, that's £2,700 a month as a revenue. Even if the farmer's getting half of that, it might still be a lot more than he was getting, given how farming's going these days. And if it maintains green space, rather than somebody coming along buying it and speculatively maybe trying planning permission for something to build, which should probably get turned down, but you never know these days, particularly given what's going on with the central government. So I'm torn, because on the one hand, I can actually see the benefits, because if you do expand out, you can see you've got Thatcham, got Upper Wolverhampton, you've got lots of areas. They may not seem large, but would probably have a high dog per household ratio, which would either have to travel potentially further. And that's why I was looking at the whole socioeconomics and the catchment area, because I know people who would travel from Tylehurst to other areas because they can't get in, but also at the same time, I know people who live up that way and they could benefit from using this. So it's a real difficult one, because the last thing you want to do is take away potential revenue stream, but at the same time, you've got to think of the local environment. And that's why I asked the question about the EVs, because we can't live our lives by restricting absolutely everything, because we'll end up doing nothing, and then no businesses will ever survive. So that's kind of where my head's at the moment.
Councillor Pemberton.
Yes, thank you, Chair. When I hear officers making comments like we consider the horse racing industry to be a largely rural business and the dog walking industry a largely urban business, it's one of the many reasons that planning law hurts my head. To me, that feels subjective. There's probably an element of opinion in there, which is absolutely fine. By having this debate and bringing this application before committee, we're all giving our opinions. And I think what's missing from the debate so far is that we're automatically assuming that the business has complete agency over where they're going to put this dog walking area. If I've understood the situation correctly, this is an arrangement between a business and a farmer which has a piece of land, and that land happens to be where it is. Yes, it might be better if this was located somewhere else and we weren't encouraging more trips into the countryside. But we are where we are. Councillor Poole raised the issue of the rural economy and supporting rural businesses. Other members have too. And it's a really difficult balance. The sustainability issue is the only reason, as far as I can tell, that is causing officers a problem with this. And, you know, from what I can see, the applicant has gone to great lengths to provide as much information as possible to set this proposal out and what's involved. As the applicant stated, the appeal decision that's in front of us, yes, there were similarities in terms of its location, and some of the issues were similar. But they were also right to point out that in that particular application, there was information missing. There was information missing over the number of daily trips. Well, we've had that put in front of us tonight. And the inspector said at paragraph 9 of that appeal decision, and I quote, that the proposed use is not intrinsically incompatible with a rural location. It's really finely balanced. My own personal opinion is, and I understand that officers disagree with me, it's not contrary to CS13. It's not contrary to paragraph 164 of the NPPF. Other members would be free to disagree with me, and I'd be interested to hear what they've got to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Poole.
Thank you, Chair. So when Councillor Reid was talking, he asked about the public rights of way foot map. So I thought that was a brilliant idea. So I had it on my computer ready to go. When looking at the public rights of way and the footpaths around Midgham, there are no rural footpaths. You literally walk down the side of the road, as I see here on the map. There are some as you go up towards the Common, up and towards Buckleberry, but they seem to be all very like following the path of the road, which would raise concerns as a dog owner. I have to add here that I'm not a dog owner. I'm a cat owner. I have owned dogs, and I much prefer cats, much to people's dismay. I know, contentious point there. So looking at the application, I kind of understand what the applicant's trying to do. They've taken a piece of land that is currently used for stock, and looking at ways of being able to change it to something that then fits. Now, after speaking and after hearing Councillor Reid speak, having someone who has a nervous dog, it might be helpful to take them somewhere where they're not going to hear the sound of road traffic and being able to move and play. And the dogs that I used to have were working dogs, so you couldn't really let them run free on a field for fear of what they might do to sheep or another animal. So I kind of understand the application here, and I also understand that as Mr. Butler says, it's a fine balance. You've got the application itself, where they're looking to deliver a service to people in the community, but also it has to wash its face. It has to meet all of the criteria. I'm very much along the same lines as Councillor Pemberton, where it does meet some of the criteria as outlined within the rural business plan, but it also doesn't meet some of the criteria for this applicant as part of the council's criteria for the application to proceed. I'd be interested to hear on anyone else's thoughts as the conversation progresses.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. Also a cat lover, but don't tell my husband. So the very reason that we're here is because we're hearing these conversations in my mind. So it's, generally things get called into committee because they are contentious or because the arguments could go either way. I have very recently seen information about a deer that was attacked in Salem Woods by 2 dog owners who allowed their dogs, it seems, to just let rip, and unfortunately the deer had to be put down. And there was lots of conversation there about irresponsible dog ownership, and I know that that isn't the case for many dog owners, but I do think it's interesting in this situation where what is being provided is perhaps a safe space for people to take their dogs and to allow them to run free, but not to have any impact on, hopefully, on any wildlife around them. And the facility that's in Pinson's Hill, and I think Councillor Pemberton, you hit the nail on the head really here. We've got a situation in Pinson's where it is right next to a sort of an urban area, but it also has the joy of a lot of open space. But we did have some contention with that one because Pinson's Lane is a very narrow lane to get cars up and down. And if you get a car down, trying to get back up again, and you can't have two cars doing it at the same time. But that one was allowed, and I believe it's. I have friends that use the facility, and it's flourishing. The issue around noise. Unfortunately, I happen to live next to somebody that has dogs that they allow them to stay out in their garden all day long and bark as all day long, literally, because they're on their own. And I can understand how residents in this area may be concerned about the noise from dogs, particularly if you've got 6 dogs at once, then there may actually be some noise. But it's a very large piece of land, and I wonder just how much noise is going to carry, and the fact that environmental health haven't objective due to the noise, then I think we need to take that into consideration. And the piece around the journeys to and from, and that this is in a rural location, well, the applicant explained that this is perhaps ideal because of the rural location, because there won't be noise from traffic. It will be for nervous dogs in particular, they will be able to perhaps, be allowed to run free and not be concerned about any noises around them. So I do understand the reasons why we have policy, and we need to take those into account. I think one last point is that who are we to judge how much money is going to be made by a business? I think that is, I won't be considering that in this equation because I don't think that falls into any planning matters at all. So I think we shouldn't judge it on those merits, but all of the others that have been discussed, I think we should.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, I think I agree with much of what certainly the last councillors Pemberton, Paul and Stuart have just said. I actually live quite close to the facility at Pinson's Lane, and I regularly walk past it. It's on one of my main walking routes. And often when I walk past, there's usually, I don't think I've ever seen more than one car there, but there is often one car parked there because someone's using it. And I have visited it with someone that's very close to me that has a very nervous dog. And I'll be honest, the introduction of that facility has made quite an enormous difference to their life, really, because of the problems they had with a dog that it was really impossible to let off a lead in any other place. So I can see the benefits this has. The Pinson's only one car. I've not heard dogs barking there when I've walked past, to be honest. I mean, it's not. I've not been struck by noise issues there. Now I realise Pinson's Lane isn't a particularly. You're right. If you haven't got this problem, if a car's coming up when you're going down, you've got a major problem. But it's not. It's rather different from the road that we're looking at here, which has much heavier traffic. I can see there's a difference there. Agree with the comments made on, whether it's going to make a lot of money for the businesses concerned, I think is a bit immaterial here. I think what I'm largely influenced by is that people with nervous dogs, and I do know a few others as well, I think it is quite important that we this facility is allowed to be introduced, and on balance, I think it's I feel inclined to support this application.
Councillor Somner.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to defend myself over the comments I made about the financial aspect of things. It's important and it's valid because it was brought up in a presentation. I didn't bring it up. It was brought up in a presentation that it was a requirement for the existing business. So, you know, it's noted within the report that it's absent, and therefore it's a point of discussion. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Stewart.
I feel I should come back and just say that I was making a point that I wouldn't be taking it into consideration, which is my right.
Thank you. So, would anybody like to make a proposal? Councillor Pemberton.
Chairman, thank you. So I would like to propose that committee goes against officers' recommendations and supports conditional approval of this application on the basis of policy ADPP1 and CS10, supporting the rural economy and subject to satisfactory discussion and consultation with officers to confirm requirements around biodiversity net gain. Thanks.
And the ecological report.
And the ecological report, thank you.
Does that find a second? Councillor Kanda.
I'd second that.
Okay, we have a proposal to give the application conditional approval. Could all those in favour please show?
Chairman, before you take that vote, can I read out a list of suggested conditions?
I apologise, I should have asked you, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. The recommendation in that case, the resolution would be against officers' recommendation. And in that case, I would suggest that it's delegated back to officers, as Councillor Pemberton's said, to resolve matters regarding biodiversity net gain and ecology and to condition accordingly on those matters. In terms of other conditions, 3 years for commencement of development in accordance with the approved plans, landscaping to be provided, a pre-commencement condition regarding provision of sustainable drainage, the provision of sight lines at the access, times of operation, external lighting, and the requirement for provision of an external lighting scheme, if any, to be erected on the site, parking provision on the site, and use of the site for dog walking only. Thank you, Chairman.
Are those acceptable to the proposer?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Sell. Everything that you've said is acceptable, and that would be my proposal, Chair. Thank you.
And the second? Okay.
Still second on that basis.
Could I just ask a question of Mr. Till?
Sure.
What would be the reason? You mentioned lighting at the end there, and I remember that it came at the site visit. I think the question of lighting came up, and it was said there wouldn't be any. You're proposing that there could be.
So it's quite common for businesses in rural locations to require lighting for instance, safety purposes, getting on towards twilight and dusk. It can become necessary for people leaving the site, for example, at those times. So that situation might change. Usually, in order to ensure that we are able to take sufficient account of any external lighting that might be required, we would condition that no external lighting should be erected unless in accordance with the scheme that's been submitted and approved by the local planning authority.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a proposal to approve the application with that list of conditions. Would all those in favour please show? And anybody against? So the application has been given. Sorry, I missed that. You abstained. Sorry, one abstention. So the application has been given conditional approval. Thank you very much. We move on then to application 24/02147, if you will, land at Strawberry Farm.
Chairman, could I just take a short break, please? Is that all right? Sorry.
Yes.
Before I present. Thanks very
I
much.
will give everybody a 5-minute break.
We are live.
So, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to resume the meeting.
Sorry,
So-
we've got I've got it repeating back again.
Yeah, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to resume the meeting to deal with application number 24/02147/FUL, land at Strawberry Farm, Aldermaston. Could I ask Mr. Butler to introduce the application, please?
Apologies. Can you hear me now? The application has come to committee because the local ward councillor has called it to committee. The reason being it appears unreasonable to reject the application on the AWE safety grounds. The site is at Strawberry Farm, Aldermaston, replacement of a fire damaged bungalow. My colleague's going to get to the full screen. Sorry about that. Can do. And the recommendation, Chairman, is that the development manager be authorised to refuse planning permission. Turning to the next page, Chairman. The application seeks planning permission for the replacement of a fire-damaged bungalow immediately to south of the Burfield Road, immediately adjacent to south of the main AWE entrance in Aldermaston Parish. And it lies immediately to the east of Kestrel's Mead, which is part of the settlement boundary of that part of Aldermaston. In terms of the planning history, the original bungalow that was on the site was approved in 1957 and has been there since until it became vacant and was subsequently burnt down. I think there's a typographical error. That should have been 2023, not 2022. Local financial considerations. The table sets out there that if the application were to be approved by committee, there would be SIL implications and a new homes bonus implications. Turning on to page 26, Chairman, in terms of the Human Rights Act, all comments from interested parties have been considered and reported in summary in this report, with the full text available on the Council's website. Just for clarity, there are no listed building issues or conservation area issues surrounding the consideration of this application. So in terms of overall consultations, Chairman, Aldermaston Parish Council have no objections. The Highway Authority are recommending conditional permission, as does the tree officer, as do the ecologists. SUD's drainage officer is seeking additional information. However, I wish to draw your attention particularly to the basis of our officer recommendation to refuse, in that the emergency planning officer, the ONR and the AWE were all strongly objecting to the application being permitted. Turning to the next page, Chairman, page 30. In terms of the appraisal, is whether the application in principle should be accepted and the tilted balance. The second main issue is the AWE site to the north in relation to the DEPZ safeguarding issue under policy OVS 8. Next is character appearance, then drainage and any other matters. In terms of the principle, normally a one-for-one replacement of a dwelling in the countryside is normally accepted under policy C1 and the HSA DPD. However, there are criteria within that policy which state that quite clearly the use should not have been, this is inter alia, should not have been abandoned and vacant. And in this case, officers consider that given the planning history and the nature of the site, it has effectively reverted to a greenfield site. The residential use on the site has been abandoned, and therefore to replace it with a dwelling would be incorrect in planning policy terms, and therefore would be clearly contrary to policies CS1 and C1 in the development plan. The next principal issue, and in officers' view, is the overriding issue, is the DEPZ one. Now, I don't normally give a very strong emphasis on recommendations, but in this case, as the lead officer on a recent public inquiry in Brimpton Common, which specifically looked at additional residential accommodation for one mobile home within the DEPZ, it is very important, in my view, for the committee to take this matter very seriously, because under the OSEP, which is the off-site emergency plan, which your own officer's emergency planning officer, and it's in fact West Berkshire Council's responsibility to determine that OSEP. It's quite clear from many appeal decisions recently that even one additional dwelling now within the DEPZ should not be allowed. We have consistently at officer level refused them, and we have consistently been supported at appeal by inspectors, with one notable exception, and that is the Holly site at Burfield. And the inspector specifically allowed that because it was an allocated site in the local plan. All the other sites are specifically not allocated, they are windfall sites. And in our view, to permit this application would be clearly contrary to the AWE advice, your emergency planning officer advice, and so forth. And therefore, on that basis alone, we are strongly recommending that this application be refused. Moving then on to paragraph 610 and character and appearance. If in fact you were to go against officer recommendation, the application was approved, because the dwelling can be visually read in conjunction with Kestrel's Mead and the 900-acre site of the built form of AWE to the north, we do not consider that character and appearance should be an additional reason for refusal, and therefore it does not appear on the agenda sheet. In terms of drainage, these issues have not been resolved, and again, applying the precautionary principle, an additional reason for refusal will correspond to drainage issues. Again, if hopefully you will elect to refuse the application, if the application is appealed, then we do have the drainage reason for refusal to hang any hooks on seeking additional information. In terms of other matters, the application has submitted with it a preliminary ecological appraisal, which has been found to be acceptable by the council ecologist, and accordingly, unlike the previous refusal on the site, no reason for refusal will correspond to this matter, and all highways issues have been satisfactorily resolved. We have one letter of objection which raises concerns over additional mobile homes being placed across the site. This was assumed to relate to the blue land, i.e. the paddock land. This does not form part of this proposal, and in any event would automatically require planning permission. Officers would not recommend that in any event. Before I come to the conclusion, Chairman, I should go through the slideshow, as it were. These are the elevations and showing a photograph of the original bungalow. This is the site now looking north across to the AWE. This is looking west to Kestrel's Mead. This is looking northwest and looking southeast across the paddocks. And this is into the site access. In terms of the update, Chairman, following a query post the committee site visit, it is confirmed that the application site boundary is approximately 50 metres from the adjacent defined settlement boundary that encloses Kestrel's Mead. Just for clarity, it's a bit of a pedantic point of view, but perhaps it needs being made. The AWE site does not have a settlement boundary, but is defined under policy CS9, which is a separate policy. Following another query from the site visit, the site planning history has been examined once again. Apparently, there was a view that there was an extant planning permission on the site for a new dwelling. This is specifically not the case. In 2022, there was a pre-application inquiry submitted, and the officers there rejected, as it were, that pre-application inquiry. Finally, the officer advice in paragraph 6.8 in the committee report relating to the Brimpton Common appeal is noted. This has still not closed, but will do so on the 7th of February, i.e. this Friday, and then we will await the decision. So on the one hand, although the tilted balance has been specifically mentioned in paragraph 6.5, we consider that in accordance with paragraph 11D of the NPPF, there are demonstrable reasons, policy objections, why this application should be refused. And therefore, Chairman, we are recommending it for refusal for 3 reasons: principle, DEPZ, and drainage. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Before we move on, I think it might be helpful if you could explain to members and members of the public doing this what the tilted balance means.
I hope I can. I might have to revert to Mr. Till, but I'll do my best. In December last year, the NPPF was varied, and in paragraph 11D, it notes that in all decision-making where the LPA does not have a 5-year housing land supply, which is the current case with this council until you presumably adopt your local plan, all housing should be permitted unless demonstrable harm would occur to the area physically and or in terms of policy. In this case, we are saying that although the addition of 1 dwelling clearly will help our 5-year housing land supply, we consider there will be demonstrable harm to policy OVS 8 and the DEPZ issue, and therefore the tilted balance to approve the application should not apply.
Thank you. Mr. Goddard, are there any highways proposed, please?
Not much on this one, Chairman. As you can see from the pictures, the access is existing. It did serve a previous dwelling before, which sadly did burn down. The proposed parking levels and layout within the site is acceptable. Therefore, your officers would recommend approval subject to conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. We move on then to the applicant. Would you like to come to the rostrum, please? And you have 5 minutes. Would you like a warning when you get towards the end?
I've got my timer. Be all right.
Thank you.
Thank you. So good evening, Chair and members. I'm actually the agent for the applicant on this particular application. As you've just heard, the main reason for the recommendation is due to the AWE emergency plan, which I feel is incorrect. The latest issued numbers within the emergency plan is dated from 2019, and at that time the bungalow was occupied. So my argument has always been that that dwelling is already accounted for within the emergency plan. In the latest comments received by the emergency planning team, they have stated that the original bungalow has now been removed from the plan as of the date of their email, which was November 24. This confirms to my mind that the bungalow was already included within the emergency plan when it was submitted, So is it reasonable to remove it during the application process and then claim it will cause detrimental harm to the emergency plan if it were to be rebuilt? Turning to the opinion that the officers and the emergency planning team have taken with regards to the removal of the bungalow, it was on the advice of the fire brigade to remove the unsafe structure which was carried out. The officer states in the report that the LPA do not accept that the bungalow on site exists and merely a slab for foundations. They go on to say that the dwelling was vacated 4 years ago and ceased to exist 3 years ago following the fire, and accordingly concluded that they believe the residential use for that site has been abandoned. That's why it's being considered as a new dwelling and not a replacement dwelling. Now, those of you that attended site last week will have seen the remains of the bungalow and the ground floor slab. This proves the bungalow was there, as well as the sales particulars submitted within the actual application itself. So there is no doubt that the bungalow existed since 1957 when it was originally granted its planning approval. This leads me on very nicely to an appeal in 2019, which some of you may well be aware of, at Red Lane, which is next to the Tadley Rugby Club, which is also just a few metres from AWE. There was a bungalow built there in 1956, which was demolished to slab level in the late 1990s. An application for a large 4-bedroom dwelling was refused, and the LPA stated again that the use had been abandoned. However, the appeal inspector allowed the appeal. The inspector confirmed that the original approved building slab was evident on site and that the original approval was not time limited and remains extant, giving the applicant the right to rebuild the dwelling in accordance with that approval. This, we feel, is directly comparable to our application, and the fact that we are looking to rebuild this fire-damaged bungalow only 3 years after the event and not some 30 years later. During the visit last week, questions were raised with regards to timescales. The first application was submitted by a different agent, but that was submitted within 9 months of the fire following some legal works. The second application was submitted by me and withdrawn due to the fact that the ward councillor had missed the date to request a committee call-in, and now obviously here we are. The officer has also stated that drainage is a reason for refusal. The fact that the original bungalow discharged rainwater to soakaways and has never caused any flooding, that's enough for me to know that the soakaways will work again on this site, and a suitably worded condition could be applied for a filtration test to be carried out prior to rebuild. I feel that given that the bungalow was already in the emergency plan, the fact that the appeal inspector has allowed the Red Lane application, and the fact that tilted balance should now be approved due to the lack of 5 years housing land supply, this application should be approved accordingly, and I respectfully ask that you please approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you remain for any questions, please? Are there any questions from members, please? Councillor Pemberton.
Thank you, Chair. I believe the fire was early 2022. Was the bungalow pushed over at that time by the fire brigade on advice, or was it done afterwards by somebody else?
So yes, it was in 2022, January 2022, when the fire took place, and it was their advice that it needed to be pushed over, and it was pretty much the very next day that it was pushed over. The actual state of the bungalow that was remaining, there was only 2 walls effectively left. Everything else had collapsed in, so it needed to go. And those of you that were there at the viewing panel will have seen the pile of rubble. You will have seen the ground floor slab. It was there. It's not evident in those photographs, conveniently, but yes, thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Gander.
So is the owner of the land now the original owner when the bungalow was set on fire?
All right, so this is the point in terms of the legal side of things. So the bungalow was actually for sale, and it was being proceeded, and that's why I put the sales particulars in to say when it was actually happening. And the current owner had purchased the property, was going through all the legal agreement, and he'd paid a considerable chunk of money. Then the fire happened, and he was legally bound to continue with the purchase. Even though he tried to pull out, he would have lost, I think it was about 185,000 that he would have lost. So he decided to continue with obviously purchasing the property and carrying on. And obviously here we are. Going on the strength of obviously the appeal that I've referred to, this is why I've then said to him, in my opinion, yes, I understand, when you have to push a property down, you lose the right to call it a residential property. But I think there's enough case law out there to prove that why this wouldn't cause any major harm.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. Can we move on then to questions for officers? Are there any questions, please? Sorry? Oh, I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon. Local ward member, Dominic Burke, I apologise, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, I won't keep you long. We heard from the agent what I think is a very reasonable argument about the occupation of the site. The site undoubtedly has a long history of occupation, and with a relatively short period that we're talking about since the fire. Meanwhile, in other parts of the district, Four Houses Corner springs to mind. There's a site which is being reoccupied after considerable absence of occupation without suffering the same kind of challenge. The number of people who would be added to the off-site emergency, AWE's off-site emergency plan, if this development was approved and went ahead, would be vanishingly small in the scheme of things. And meanwhile, we continue to see applications in Aldermaston and the surrounding areas approved. Admittedly, not residential applications, but the number of businesses expanding and being established in, for example, Young's Industrial Estate on Paces Hill must surely be bringing to bear considerable stress on the off-site emergency plan. Those are people, while not resident, they're not included in the plan in any way whatsoever. So I would urge members to consider that those anomalies in your discussions with officers.
Thank you. Would you like to stay there for a few minutes if there's any questions from members? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry, now we'll move on to questions for officers. Councillor Somner.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to get some clarity on timelines, please, Mr. Butler. When you were presenting, I think you noted that you thought one of the dates should have been 2023. So I'm looking at item 2.2.
Yeah.
The bungalow in question was vacant from the 9th of January 22 and burnt down in its entirety on the 3rd, which clearly is 6 days prior. So can we just be clear, please, on the timeline that we're talking about? Because I do think it's relevant.
Yeah, I stand to be corrected, but that's a typographical error. So it was burnt down on the 3rd of January 2023. So just almost a year later, and then sold at auction.
I'm getting head shaking all the way around, including from the agent. We need to be clear on that. There is something within the presentation, but my eyes aren't that good. So if anybody can see
there, please, Councillor, sorry about that. But the point is, irrespective of the timelines, officers consider that the use has been abandoned. That's our view. You obviously don't have to agree with that point of view, and that's fine. That's not a problem. But that is our view, irrespective of the timelines.
Chairman, if I may, because I think it's an important point here. Abandonment isn't necessarily what the council, what the local planning authority needs to make its judgment on here. It is whether there was a dwelling there in the first place. And if I can quote from the previous case officer's report in 2022, because this refers to a High Court case, which I think is somewhat determinative in this case. So in a High Court case, Vallon International versus Secretary of State 2002, concerning a fire-destroyed dwelling, it was found that it was open to an inspector to find that the ruin was no longer a building in established residential use or an existing dwelling. So how this relates to that is that it is relevant to your planning policies and to the administration of the DEPZ whether there was what is technically considered a building on site at the time that the application was made. In this case, your officer's view is that the building, similarly to the 2002 case building, was destroyed. It was fire damaged and then destroyed, and therefore, for the purposes of interpretation of the local plan policies, CS8 and the HSA DPD policy, there is no dwelling on the site to replace. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions, please? Councillor Kanda.
Maybe just a question of clarification to Mr. Teal. So if I understood you correctly just now, because listening to the agent, it sounds like there was an ongoing process almost throughout the whole point. But because of legals and because of selling and because of this and the other and what have you, nothing's happened and now the whole planning application. From what you said, it implies that if somebody burnt my house down and I put planning permission to rebuild it because I wanted to maybe make it 3 stories or what have you, or slightly different footprint, a day later, it could be construed if the building was completely taken away, that it no longer exists as a residence.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, that is, if the building was demolished, that is how your planning policies are written. Thank you, Chairman.
Any other questions? So, there's one question I'd like to ask. The agent mentioned an application in Red Lane. I'm not sure whether that's in our district or in Hampshire, but are you familiar with that one?
I believe it is in the district, Chairman. I recall reading that appeal decision. I don't have it to hand, but in that particular case, it was different from this case because the inspector considered there was actually an extant permission which hadn't been implemented for a dwelling on the site, subject to discharge of preconditions and so on. So it's completely different here because there is no extant permission per se.
Thank you. Are there being no other questions? So, there is.
Sorry, one
That's
more
okay.
question. I think it's 6.7. There was reference to setting a precedent if we were to allow planning permission. And I guess the point I'd kind of make or ask is, do you see the fact that there was a building there, there's a footprint there, etc., and if we were to disagree with the planning officer's recommendations, do you really suspect that they would set a dangerous precedent? Because it's quite a particular precedent to set.
I do actually, and particularly in this case, fortuitously or not fortuitously as the case may be, the timing would be extremely unfortunate for the council, given we have an ongoing public inquiry. I mentioned at Brimton Common, admittedly for a mobile home, but it has the same effect as being change of use of land to a dwelling, as it were, and that's in the DEPZ. I don't normally stress things this strongly, but having the council spent a considerable amount of public money on that public inquiry and defending its position. And one of the significant issues at appeal relates to the DEPZ. As I said before, we've been continuously successful on small sites. I think there was one recently at Sunnyside in Burfield Common, additional dwelling, and that was in the settlement. That was refused by an inspector on DEPZ grounds because they make the specific point that whereas you could look at the cumulative harm of one additional dwelling being very small, that argument can be repeated many times. And my specific concern tonight is that if you did approve this application, that would be prayed in aid by the appellants at the Brimpton Common appeal, for example, and it would be prayed in aid at subsequent appeals.
Thank you. Councillor Poole.
Thank you very much, Chair. Sorry, Mr. Butler, I'd like to respond to your comment there. So you mentioned Burfield Parish being within the DPZ. It's not only the ward that I reside, but it's the village that I live in. And I understand that that application was a new build classified as infill, which is why it was refused, rather than re-establishing a property on an existing site where a building had been removed.
That is correct, but the point there is the DPZ issue still applied. So in one sense, it was even stronger because new build within a settlement is acceptable in principle, but it was still dismissed on the DPZ issue.
Councillor Pemberton.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my knowledge of the AWE off-site emergency plan isn't what it should be. Would one of the officers just be able to comment on the agent's suggestion that evacuation numbers, including those linked to this proposed development, are already accounted for in the most recent sort of iteration?
I'm not the emergency planning officer, so I'm not an expert. However, my understanding is that in 2019, something called the Berkshire regulations were introduced, which significantly strengthened the ONR's position in relation to DPZ safeguarding. And whilst the agent is in fact correct that this dwelling would have been incorporated into the OSEP in 2019, every year, for obvious reasons, the OSEP is reviewed by your officers, not myself, of course, but by the emergency planning officer. And all changes are taken into account. And clearly the fact that there was no one no longer living on this site, that was appropriately taken into account. And this site was therefore taken out of the OSEP in, I think he mentioned 2024. Hope that helps.
Councillor Mays.
Yeah, I would like to confirm one or two things. The DPZ that we're talking about in the Burfield case is a completely different DPZ than the one we're talking about here, which is the one for Aldermaston. And they're not the same. The two DPZs don't overlap each other. So we've got to be a bit careful what we're using as a comparison. The bungalow I know about, I mean, I've lived in the area for 50 years. I was aware of the situation when the Kestrel site was built. That was originally, that's in West Berkshire, in Aldermaston ward, and was awarded by the inspector on appeal. The same applies to the site visit we did for the
Councillor Mays, is there a question, please? Or would you like to bring up those points in the debate?
Yeah, I'm just saying that the two sites we've been talking about are in Hampshire, in West Berkshire. They're in Aldermaston, but they're not similar to the site that we're talking about now.
At the moment, we're asking questions of officers.
Okay.
Are there any? Councillor Kander.
Sorry, one last question. And maybe it's a point of clarification. The refusal is based on the DPZ or DPZ, rather than the fact that the house no longer exists. Well, that's the clarification I'm asking for, because if it's related to the fact that the house no longer exists and therefore is considered greenfield and therefore it's a brand new building application, that's one consideration. The other consideration, which is to some extent linked to the High Court appeal that's going on, is related to the DPZ. So I'm just trying to understand what is the real crux?
Well, the crux of the matter is that both reasons for refusal 1 and 2 apply. Reason for refusal number 1 relates to principle. We consider this is effectively now quote, greenfield site. And therefore, because it doesn't form one of the exceptional housing applications or exceptions for housing in the countryside, because that's what it is, it lies outside a settlement boundary, de facto, it is contrary to those policies set out in reason for refusal number 1. But in addition, which strengthens the reasons, the recommendation, there is also the DEPZ issue. So there are actually 2 significant issues. Probably in my presentation, I have emphasised perhaps too much the DEPZ issue. The in principle issue is also significant.
You want to follow up, sorry? Yeah.
So based on what Mr. Teal said and also what you've just said yourself, Mr. Butler, it seems to me that is there a specific policy that determines the timeframe within which something becomes greenfield from having previously had a property on it?
There's a lot of case law on this, and I may have to revert to Mr. Till's expertise. But the qualification in the NPPF in terms of the glossary and the definitions rather, says that whether a site, if someone was to look at a site, would you consider that to be greenfield or brownfield previously developed? Well, that is a matter of judgment. We're sort of labouring the point now, but you've asked the question, the subjective judgment, would person A go on that site and say this is still a brownfield site? Person B may go on the site and say this is effectively greenfield. You need to make your judgment. I've made my professional judgment as the case officer, and I consider it has effectively reverted to a greenfield site.
Okay, thank you.
It's relevant also that it's outside the settlement boundary.
Yeah, very relevant.
Yes. Any other questions? Okay, shall we move on then to debate with somebody? Like to, Councillor Pemberton.
Getting first this time. Councillor Cotham's not here. Yeah, I feel really uncomfortable about this. I take on board all of the quite legitimate concerns that officers have about the DEPZ and AWE's evacuation plan. Of course I do. Whether an ongoing single application that's currently going through the appeal process would be affected by what we decide tonight, would an inspector really place that much weight on the committee's decision when we have potentially a certain amount of latitude to reach outcomes that are contrary to policy or exceptions to policy? That's a matter for judgment. I'm not sure that argument is particularly persuasive, if I'm honest with you, but I understand that other people may disagree. I felt really uncomfortable when officers pointed out that your house could burn down, and if you're not within a defined settlement, you may struggle to rebuild it because of our planning policy. I don't like that. I understand that that's what the policy says, but obviously there is an economic issue at play here in that the owner of the land has entered into a contract to purchase the land, has purchased the land, has parted with a considerable sum of money, and now can't develop the property because of all of the reasons that we've discussed tonight. I know that's not a planning issue, but it kind of feels like it should be a planning issue for the reasons that I've just mentioned there. I'm going to leave it there and see what others think, but I'm really going to struggle to come to a conclusion at the moment. Thanks, Chair.
I would hope that when the person purchased the property, they did investigated the legal situation and the planning situation before they bid.
Fully appreciate that, but if your house burns down, that's the logical conclusion of what our planning policies say.
And the other thing is, it's often been said that when you exchange contracts on a property, you are responsible for the property and you should take out insurance. So that's.
Chairman, may I come back?
Yeah, sure.
Apologies, Chairman. I just, off the back of what Councillor Pemberton's just said, like to remind the committee that the resolution that you reached tonight is the resolution of the Planning Committee on behalf of the local planning authority. And in that respect, should it be the local planning authority's decision to approve, an inspector would give a great deal of weight to how it's interpreted its own policy in terms of an appeal that's live and under consideration at the moment. So I hope that members will consider that when arriving at the conclusion of their deliberations. Thank you, Chairman.
And I would imagine it's quite likely that the agent for that application is watching this evening. Councillor Somner.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, I think we all know, Mr. Till, what you just said, as we do Mr. Butler previously. I think my concern is very similar to members sitting opposite. Anybody that lives within that area, either of the noted zones that we've got on our live map, that has the unfortunate incidents where their property is burnt to the ground, apparently can't rebuild it. I think we heard, Chair, to coming on at the point that you made to Councillor Pemberton, is that the property was bought still standing. The legal process was being gone through, the purchase process was being gone through when the fire took hold. So this is why I was so keen to get timelines established earlier, because there is a timeline that says 2019, it was a lived-in standing property. It was within plans, counted. I mean, anybody should be listening into this that lives within those zones should be immensely worried now that anything might happen to their property, because it would appear that they will need to look to move outside of it should anything happen. And I don't
only
think,
if they're outside settlement boundaries.
and there will be more than this property. The fact of the matter remains the same. It should be a massive concern that we are saying that if your property is raised to the ground, if the fire brigade say that needs to come down, property owners need to say, no, thanks very much. I know it's going to be dangerous, but actually, if it comes down, I won't be able to rebuild it. Well, I understand the AWE situation. I understand because I've been involved in many of the conversations through years of sitting in these committees and sitting upstairs having them. But this is a strange situation where the only reason that we appear to be debating whether it's a replacement or whether it was abandoned is timeline. And we can't seem to get to the bottom of timeline. I'm interested to see what anybody else has to say. We do have to be careful. I've never believed that anything we do in this chamber sets precedent. And I've always said, as you will remember, I'm sure, Chair, that we are here to talk about things that don't normally just go through on the nod through policy. We are here to talk about stuff on exception. Otherwise, it goes through. We let officers deal with it. We are more than aware of their capabilities. We look at the odd stuff, and this is odd.
So, Councillor Poole, sorry.
Yeah, anyway, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Kander. There are three things that play on my mind as I've been listening to the conversations go around this evening. The thing that jumps out immediately for me is a comment that Mr. Till said to me once, which was, you judge the application on its own merit. So you look at the application that's in front of you and you look at that application and you consider that application in itself. So whilst I understand that there are other applications currently going through train that may be influenced by the decision this evening, I'm looking at this application and by itself. I'm also very mindful that as a homeowner that lives inside the DPEZ, that if my house was to burn down, if I let my husband do too much cooking and it burns down, that I might not be able to rebuild my own home. And that to me doesn't feel right. It doesn't sound right. I understand that that's what we say in our policy, but it really doesn't feel right at all. Furthermore, looking at that site itself, I remember Mr. Butler saying that it's a personal judgment about whether or not the site is it has a dwelling or whether or not it's been returned to its original state. And personal judgment is something that I find comes through in a lot of situations here. I had a situation in highways where it was a personal judgment about whether a pothole was deemed dangerous. I had another situation where it was something went one way or the other. And I think when we're looking at situations like this, where we do get to see applications that are really contentious issues, that I think we need more than just personal judgment. I think we need to have some absolutes in order to hang our hat on. And I'm very much with Councillor Somner and Councillor Pemberton. This is a really odd case, and I'm not happy sitting here and being asked to make a decision one way or the other. Very much on the fence with this one, Chair.
Councillor Kanda.
Yes, I tend to agree with everyone that's spoken so far. I also find this well, we operate in a grey. That's the whole reason we're here. And the fact is that more heads than one or two, and if in the collective argument might actually come up with something different. And I think that's kind of why we're here. Another thing, apart from the things that have bothered everybody else, the other thing that bothers me is the fact that in 2019 it was on the list, and then when pushed in 2024 it was suddenly not on the list. If it was only taken off the list then because of an inquiry, that to me doesn't smack of standard process either, and therefore is open to question and appeal in and of itself from that perspective. And having lived in Kestrel's Mead years ago, I could have had half a dozen people living in my house. In fact, I had 2 kids I knew nothing about. They wouldn't have been counted. And I was never asked what head count I had in my house, and I lived there for 4 years. So using the DPEZ as a reason, which is why I was pushing and asking about the definition of when it becomes greenfield and when it does not, which seems a subjective concept. If there was a timeline that said if it's been left levelled just as a base for 12 months or more than 12 months, then fine. Rules weren't followed, unless, of course, there was reason for that with regards to the whole legal process, which is another thing that concerns me. Because people who buy potentially off auction or buy something on spec because it's derelict and they know they're going to have to rebuild it and then suddenly not be able to rebuild it, that 185k investment goes down to 20k or 10k an acre, right? Which is nothing, because what's the alternative use for that land if it's not being used to house somebody and maybe put horses on? So from my perspective, I've also conflicted because it's not clean, but that's why we're here. So,
Councillor Taylor.
Yes, I mean, prior to this meeting, when I'd read through the papers, I read through them again this afternoon, I was particularly struck by the strength of the view that was being expressed by, was it the DEPZ? I think there were two letters strongly urging that we should refuse this application. And then when the opening officer's remarks, I think was saying, was trying to put over very strongly that we should refuse this. But having listened to some of the other arguments now, I must admit I'm veering the other way, and I can see that there are, this is quite an unusual situation, and I'm still on, I'm still not quite sure how I'm going to vote on this, but it's a very tricky one.
Any other points? In that case, would someone like to make a proposal? Councillor Pemberton.
So, I mean, as a starter for 10, given the wider strategic issues, I wonder whether this is one to refer up to district. So that would be my proposal.
Councillor Somner.
I note that my only other question is 7th of February has been noted a few times, and I wonder whether there's a potential to defer, and if that outcome has bearing on our decision, then are we better deferring to see what the outcome of that is? and then taking it forward. And then if we don't have a change in the situation, then I would have to suggest to agree with Councillor Pemberton.
Would you like to comment on that, Mr. Till?
Thank you, Chairman. In that respect, members are within their right to refer up to district and may, in this case, take the view that there are potentially implications that may affect development in a significant part of the district. Obviously, DEPZ doesn't cover the entire district, but certainly there are arguments within this application that could have a bearing on arguments repeated elsewhere, and your officers have already given you that view. In terms of the suggestion to defer, a note of caution in respect of that suggestion is that it could be some time before the outcome of that appeal is known. Members may wish to consider whether it's reasonable to delay indefinitely. But again, the committee is within their rights to seek to defer the decision on that basis.
Well, we have a proposal. Is there a second to defer to District Planning Committee? Is there a seconder for that?
I'm happy to second it, Chair, but before we do that, can I just clarify that, as I said, 7th of February has been mentioned a few times. Can Mr. Till just confirm in what he's last said where that 7th is, that start point, or is that supposed to be I understood it was a closing point?
That's, I believe, the argument for closings. But if I pass you over to the case officer.
Yeah, the 7th of February is the last formal day of the inquiry being heard virtually, and then it will be closed. We've got no idea how long the inspector will take. I would say it's a minimum of a month. It could be 2 months. It may even be longer. So, as with Simon, I think it would be perversely rather unfair on the applicant to defer for that length of period on that basis.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. In that case, I'm happy to second Councillor Pemberton's proposal.
Thank you. So we have a proposal that's been seconded to defer this application to the District Planning Committee. Could I have all those in favour, please? Anybody against? Anybody not voting? No. Okay, thank you very much. So that application has been deferred to the District Planning Committee. There's no further business this evening, so I will close the meeting.